Hi, I'm Charles Germany, and today we're going to talk about hard drives. To start out with, we have a 2.5-inch laptop drive. Very slender. This is a 100 gigabyte drive, and here's the interface where it plugs into the laptop. To access one of these drives, most laptops usually have a panel on the bottom, although on some models the keyboard, you can remove the keyboard from the top, and when you pull the keyboard you can access the hard drive that way. We'll pull the panel off here. This is an Acer laptop I have. And here's our hard drive here. Let me pull this screw here. Just take this little strip here, we're going to pull it backwards. That slides the hard drive out. We can lift it up and we can see. This is a serial ATA laptop drive, whereas this was an eIDE, but you can see, even though the interfaces are different, it's still the same size, 2.5-inch, very slender. This is a 160 gigabyte drive. This is a 100 gigabyte drive. Because of basically perpendicular writing, a lot of the newer laptop drives can go upwards of 300 gigabytes. And this may get even larger in the future, in the next few years. Okay. Put it back in. Probably this is one of the easiest types of drives to upgrade or configure or repair because there's so very little for you to do other than put it in the laptop. Put the screw back there. And we'll put our panel back on. And there's our Acer with our 160 gig laptop. Good to go. eIDE. This is a USB 2 interface on the drive. It goes on the drive like so. Right here, very carefully, you don't want to bend those pins. And the circuitry here basically just allows this laptop drive, 100 gig laptop drive, to be interfaced to a USB 2 interface. A little on-off switch, and if you have, in a USB 1.1 situation or a low power USB port, you can optionally plug in a 5-volt adapter. But this particular adapter draws all of its power from a USB 2 port if it's plugged in. So it makes a nice drive for backing things up. Later on, when we talk about ghosting and backing the drive up, this just goes in. And here, and then 2 screws go in the side, and there we have our removable drive. But when we talk about ghosting and backing things up, we'll use that to image some partitions on different hard drives. A couple of other hard drives. Here's our 3.5-inch. Now these are a bit larger. These go on servers and desktops. This is an old 1.2 gigabyte Western Digital Caviar. One of the older ones that still had a stepper motor. The newer models have voice coils. Now this is IDE and eIDE. Here is an example of a SCSI drive. SCSI was very popular in the later 90s. It's declining in popularity a bit because the newer drive format, serial ATA, have far exceeded it in terms of speed and capacity. But just so you can see, you guys may end up working on one of these, maybe an older server, older machine that has a SCSI interface. SCSI cable. We're going to talk about how these things are cabled. SCSI was a little bit different in the sense that you could have multiple devices chained on what was called a SCSI chain. They would have to have, each would have to have a unique SCSI ID. But it still had a Molex connector that would connect to it to power it. And then here are your jumper configurations. Alright, let's go ahead and look at another IDE drive, and let's take a drive apart and see what makes it tick. Talked about this in the lecture this week, but from the outside, this is an old drive, by the way, that I no longer functions, so I had no problem breaking the seal. just remember, if you break the seal, you'll also violate the warranty. So if there's any chance that your drive will be replaced by the warranty, don't break the seal. This will make a good demonstration model. On the outside, it's just a metallic case with some circuitry. In this case here are the controller circuits and the memory cache. Remember that every hard drive has cache. I'm going to pull the card off. I've already taken the screws out of it, so it's easy to remove. And you can see where the circuit board connects to the drive here. And then I've already broken the seal, so I'm going to pull the top of the drive off. And we'll look at what goes on inside of a hard drive. Now, we've been talking about this week. Here are the metallic platters, and they're coated with a ferromagnetic material. That ferromagnetic material they're basically magnetic grains that align themselves according to magnetic lines of flux. And it allows a dipole condition to be created along the platter. That dipole position, basically magnetic poles of north and south, correspond to the zeros and ones where binary data is written to the platter. So we have these metal platters, and they're on the spindle motor. The spindle motor spins, and these drives spin, for laptop drives, you're talking starting at around 4,200. For desktop drives, you're talking around 5,400, then you move up to 7,200 RPM and 10,000 RPM. And some super high performance drives even will run faster than that, maybe 12,000 RPM. With the spindle motor spins, the platters are spinning very fast. Here we have an actuator arm. The actuator arm moves across the metallic platters. In this particular model, it's on a voice coil, but either a voice coil or a stepper motor will move the actuator arm across the platters. There are magnetic heads, and you can see on the actuator arm, if you look right in here, look in the platters, it's on both sides of the platter all the way down. So the actuator arm, moved by the voice coil, moves across the platters, and it seeks different parts of the metallic platter, and it reads the dipole magnetized lines of flux, which is then interpreted as zeros and ones and loaded into the system's memory when you transfer data from secondary storage to primary storage. By the way, you can see, or you can imagine why, if this drive were spinning, this is a 7,200 RPM model, very fast, 7,200 revolutions per minute. You can imagine that if I were to drop it, a vibration like that, moving at that speed, would damage the actuator arm. And a lot of times that's what happens. This will come out of alignment. One of the heads or several of the heads will even come into contact with the ferromagnetic material on the platter. And that's where you get a damaged drive from. Two techniques we talked about bringing the drive back. Occasionally, not always, but if you're very lucky, sometimes you can put a drive in the freezer for a few hours, and the cold causes the metal to contract, and that may cause the actuator arm to snap back into place. You should copy the data off that drive as soon as possible, however, because as the drive heats up, you'll lose the ability to read the drive. That's one way of recovering data without having to pull the platters. Another method is what I call the shock put method, and basically you try to create a counter shock. So if I drop the drive, and in this case the heads were out of alignment or it damaged the actuator arm in some way, a lot of times I brought failed drives back by holding them very tightly. You want to hold it very tightly so you don't break a window, but you hold it extremely tightly with your hand, and as hard as you can, fling it. And the centrifugal force from that motion sometimes is enough to activate or to move the actuator arm. If that doesn't work, then you have a few other options that are much more time-consuming, much more complicated. You could always pull the platters and put them into a drive. You want to do this, of course, in a clean room. You don't want dust or fingerprints. I mean, I don't care. This is a dead drive. I'm rubbing my fingers all over it. But if you cared about the data, you would never want to actually touch the platters, and you wouldn't want to get dust on them. So in a clean room, you could pull these platters out and mount them in another drive assembly, and you could recover the data that way. Be aware that people charge thousands of dollars for this service, or a lot of times they will charge you by the megabyte. It can be very expensive to do data recovery. So instead of all of these methods that I've just talked about as far as recovering a bad drive, your best defense is a backup. Always, always keep several redundant copies of your data in different places, multiple places. Always have a good backup if that data is important to you. Sure beats the heck out of all the other methods we talked about in terms of recovering a drive.